welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. We're here to talk about the power of authentic leadership. I've got an incredible guest with us today. His name is Bill George. Bill is the author of the best-selling book, Discover Your True North. He's the former CEO and chairman of Medtronic, and he's a professor and senior fellow at Harvard Business School. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Garrett. Good to be here.
So we're here to talk about authentic leadership, and a lot of our audience, a lot of the people watching this video are probably thinking to themselves like, oh, of course, I of course am an authentic leader, or I would love to strive to be an authentic leader. But in your opinion or in your perspective, what is authentic leadership?
Well, authentic leaders are real, they're genuine, they're people you can trust because you know you're getting the real thing. They're not trying to fake it to make it, they're not trying to put on pretenses. But I also think they have a core set of values that guide their lives and a deep-seated purpose that goes beyond their own, if you will, success or self-gratification, but a purpose that inspires other people and brings people together. So the biggest challenge I think leaders have today is how do you align people, particularly global companies all over the world, different cultures, different racial, religious, ethnic, national origin backgrounds. How do you get everyone aligned around a common set of purpose? And I would argue that you can't get them aligned around making 91 cents a share this quarter. They're going to be aligned much more around a common goal and a common purpose. And that's what people get passionate about. So you need that purpose, you need the values, and I think you need to build authentic relationships that do create that kind of trust. And that requires a certain level of transparency. So leadership has changed dramatically from where it was 15, 20 years ago, when it was all about charisma, it was about the show, it was about power. Today, leaders have to empower other people. And you can get so much more from an organization if you're an empowering leader than you can just saying, you do this, you do that, I have the power, you do what I tell you. You can get so much more from your organization because the creativity comes out, the innovation comes out, the ideas, and the debates and discussions. So that is very, very important. And I think the other thing I'd say is that we have moved strongly now away from maximizing shareholder value to looking at all stakeholders. And so unless as a leader you can inspire your employees, they're not going to interact well with your customers. And so a lot of leadership today is how do you get people committed, your employees, so that they in turn will carry out that mission with your customers? Because that's really where it's played out in the marketplace, if you will.
That's a really fascinating perspective, and that very much aligns a lot with what we see with executive mentorship when we're facilitating mentoring relationships between leaders and even really all professionals. Is if I hear somebody say something along the lines of, oh, I'm more than happy to be a mentor, but I'm not actually interested in getting a mentor. What that conveys is, are you not open to learning from somebody else who could potentially teach you something you've never considered before? And so I think this notion of what you're saying is that we can all learn something as leaders, we can all grow. I think that's extremely powerful. And perhaps the reason why we potentially cling to these older mindsets of like, hey, do as I say, and follow exactly what I'm saying, and not necessarily be authentic about what is actually going on. I can see that potentially is still sometimes holding true today, but it's not serving leaders to be their best selves. I guess what I'd be what I'd be curious to know was, when was that shift? What do you think kind of started that shift to being more of an authentic leader and really starting to see the value in that?
I think it started about 20 years ago, but it really took hold around 2011 or 12 when Harvard Business Review said authentic leadership is the gold standard for leaders, and purpose has become so much more prevalent in the last 10 years. And so I think a lot of corporations that were led by charismatic leaders collapsed and failed, or focused entirely on maximizing shareholder value, got in deep trouble. And I think now we see a rejuvenation that leaders have broad responsibilities. But back to mentoring, coaching, these are critical things in our society. Any leader who isn't willing to, doesn't want to have a mentor, or doesn't have a mentor, or doesn't have a coach, you need to get honest feedback from people. Who's going to tell you the truth? That's the key question. Who's going to tell it like it is and tell it what you don't want to hear? And unless you trust that person to give you honest feedback, they're not looking out for themselves, but they're really concerned about your welfare and how you do. So I believe that having a mentor and a coach is critical to your personal growth, because I hope I'm still growing as a leader. One has to continue growing. You never get so you're the finished product. We teach a lot of CEOs of very large companies at Harvard in our CEO program. And if they aren't willing to learn and continue to grow, they're not going to become good CEOs. And I've seen a number who don't come to the program. They think they're above all this. I'm past all that. No, you're just getting going. So it's a constant learning process, and you learn in that interaction with people, with the people who work with you, and you learn from your mentors. And so the best mentor is someone who's really wise and cares more about you than they do themselves, and where you feel a chemistry between two people. You can't just have a formal mentoring. You have to feel like there's a certain chemistry that we grow with each other. I had a mentor, Warren Bennis, when I left Harvard. Was not a business mentor. He was a leadership mentor, a great author, but he gave me a firm called homology, where two items in biology grow in just to position each other, like something, a vine growing around a tree or two trees. And I think that's the way it is between me as a mentor. I'm doing a lot more mentoring than leading right now, and leaders. And we have that continue to grow. Every time I interact with somebody who's 50, who's just become CEO, I grow tremendously from that experience, but hopefully they do too, for my mentoring and kind of the wisdom that I've been able to accumulate over the years.
That's awesome. I love what you just shared there. I think what you just shared was gold and extremely valuable for any leader to hear, whether you are a leader in title or you're not a leader in title. I think leadership is something that you can convey and show no matter what your role is within a company or within an organization. What causes professionals to potentially stray away from that authenticity? Why do they potentially go down a path that is not necessarily the authentic path? What causes leaders to go down that path?
I think a lot of leaders are trying to be something they're not, or they're unhappy with the way things are going. They're trying to create a false impression of a classic case. A sad case is the case of General Electric. And Jeff Immelt had 16 years there, but he didn't really listen to feedback, and he lost the strong leaders that Jack Welch had around him. And so he wasn't open to that, and he kind of shut it down. And so he didn't really take in the feedback. He was a hail fellow, well-met, good guy, and he was trying to create a facade that GE is some kind of great tech company. Well, they were not, and they're not going to be. They do great things in jet engines and medical products, but they're not an IT company. They're not going to be an Apple or a Google. So he was trying to, and so I think he got away from not only who he was, but who the company was. And so he kind of lost it because he was trying to impress the President of the United States and do a lot of things like that. And it doesn't work. There are many, many other examples, much worse examples than that, of people who actually were much more fraudulent. But Jeff's a good guy, so he's not a bad guy. It's just he got off track. He lost his way. Another one is I was on a board for 3 boards, and I got to have good professional friends, not personal friends, with Rajat Gupta, former head of McKinsey, who had a great run. And then he wanted to be something he wasn't. He wanted to become a billionaire and get involved in making a lot of money through hedge funds. And he got in bed with a hedge fund trader, and I was on the Goldman board with him, sitting next to him. The most valuable information, inside information I ever had in a board, was when Warren Buffett, when Goldman stock was going down in 2008, September, things were really bad. And we brought Warren Buffett in to invest in Goldman. It was as much psychological as his $10 billion of investment was. But Rajat took that information and gave it to a well-known inside trader, and wound up, sadly, for 2 years in jail. But he was a good human being. He still is, but he got pulled off track trying to be something he wasn't. And I think that's where people get in trouble, of trying to be something they're not.
Those are really fascinating stories. Those are really, really interesting. I guess what I'd be curious to know is, how do we strike that fine balance between driving innovation and being authentic and true to ourselves? Because I think, like, for us to push the button forward, for us to grow and be innovative, we have to be willing to try new things. Is that right? What are your thoughts?
Oh, no. Authentic leaders drive innovation. I mean, look at Tim Cook. at Apple. He doesn't appear to be, all that charismatic, and he's not the true innovator. Steve Jobs is a true innovator, but he's driving his innovators forward. And look how Apple has become the most valuable company in the world under his leadership, because they keep driving innovation. The most recent CEO of Medtronic, Omar Ishrak, is a PhD in electrical engineering, and he's from Bangladesh. He's an extreme introvert, but I tell you, he drove innovation at Medtronic. He did a spectacular job. He's extremely authentic. He didn't try to be something he's not. He's very real. So I see those two. You have to be, because if you're curious, you're authentic, you want to explore new ideas. I want to learn from you, Gary. What are you hearing? What do you know? And I want to keep taking that in so I can continue to grow. And yeah, I have to sift through that. Some of the stuff I get from, on TV and other thing, I have to say that didn't make any sense. But I think you have to have a filter. But I think that's where people who are wise, they will filter for you. That's why I mentioned mentoring earlier. But I think that's where people get off track. They stop listening to other people. I wish some of the people I've mentioned were consulting and listening to other people that had a mentor, but they kind of felt they'd gone beyond that and they weren't listening. They stopped listening to other people. And I think that's where you get in real trouble. I hope I don't stop listening to other people that I can learn from, because I'm constantly learning from what new things are coming along. What are the innovative things? What are the new technologies? What are the new ideas I never thought of 10 years ago, because they're all brand new, but they're exciting. So I've got to learn and get into that. I'm not going to be the expert, but I need to engage. And that's why I love engaging with young people, looking at people in their 20s. They have so many creative ideas. It's amazing the things they do. How do you get rid of all the plastic in the ocean? I mean, they're just huge issues people are willing to take on.
And I think that's a strong point. I think I'm glad that you identified that distinction and really showed some examples of great, authentic leaders that are driving innovation. Because I think there are some cultures, especially perhaps in Silicon Valley, where you see a lot of companies, if you look at something like a Theranos, where they feel that pressure to have to come up with this crazy grand solution, and they want to just more or less stay in the good graces of everybody else. And that's not necessarily where the business is going, and it's not necessarily being true authentic to who they actually are.
Well, that's a very sad case of Elizabeth Holmes, because she thought she could fake it to make it. I wrote an article about that. I never had so much pushback on an article before since in my life on an article I wrote, because I was challenging her on faking it to make it. And that was very, very disappointing. There was nothing there. It was all a fraud. And it's a very sad case that's an extreme case. But there are other people who, are kind of out there thinking they can appear to be something they're not. And that's a good way to get. You may get a couple of promotions. You may, as Lincoln said, you may fool some of the people some of the time, but you're not going to fool all the people all the time. And I think it catches up with you. And look, things come around. People remember who you were 20, 30 years ago. And they remember, were you a real person, or, were you faking it to make it? So I think that was one of the worst theories that ever came out, or this body language theories. You could put on a certain body language and assume a power stance. This is all nonsense. Look, the biggest issue we have in our society today is we have this whole identity thing. I don't want to talk about identity politics. I want to talk about, we're identifying ourselves by the color of our skin, by our religion, by our race, by our national origin, by our sexual identity. No, those are all, that's interesting, but I grew up in a small town, I grew up in a city. No, I want to know who is the person inside. That's who the real person. Where's the passion? Where's the compassion? Where's the courage? Where does that come from? And that's the qualities we need to develop, are those inner qualities that leaders that you work with have. How do you develop? Today, Garrett, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say, you can't be a great leader just by being the smartest person in the room, or being by the best analyst, or driving the numbers. You will not become a great leader. You might make it for 3-4 years, but eventually things will collapse around you. Today, you have to blend those qualities, not that they're not important, with qualities of the heart. What do I mean by that? You have to have compassion for your customers. You have to have empathy for your employees who are going through difficult times. You have to have a sense of courage to make the bold move. And if you don't have those qualities, you will not be a great leader. Many years ago, I was out in San Francisco and heard a session with Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Buddhist monk. And he said something I never forgot. He said, the longest journey you'll ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart. It's about 18 inches from your head to your heart. What he meant by that is you have to integrate these two things. You can't be all heart, you can't be all head. You have to be able to integrate if you want to be a great leader, because people want to know I'm dealing with a real person. I want to know the person cares about me. Customers want to know, do you have compassion for what I'm going through? Am I harming patients by a Medtronic device? Boy, that's terrible. And so, yeah, we have to have compassion. If we've done that, we have to go fix it right away. Have some empathy for people.
When you were the CEO of Medtronic, did you ever have somebody who wasn't necessarily a leader in title show authentic leadership? And if so, how did they do that? What did they do to set themselves apart to you, where you essentially saw it to yourself, you're like, whoa, this person is really showing authentic leadership, even though they're not necessarily a senior person within the company?
I remember visiting a heart valve plant, and our heart valves are being sold very well. This is basically a valve you take out of a pig, goes through very complex chemical processes, and gets carved up, more of an art than a science. And I talked to the number one producer, how can we expand? And she produced more heart valves than anyone else on the line. And she looked at me with this, by the way, she had no direct reports. And she looked at me with this passion in her eyes. And I said, well, tell me about your work. And I'm an industrial engineer. And how do you do this, that you can turn out twice as many valves as anyone else? And she wouldn't even look down at her tools. She looked at me and said, Mr. George, let me tell you something. My job is to save people's lives. That's what I do. And that quality of everything has to be perfect. And so we don't need a quality inspector on our line. Before it leaves my bench, it has to be perfect, because I think, is that valve going to go in my husband or my daughter or my mother? And if it's not perfect, it's not going to pass muster. And so I could never live with the fact I'd cause someone's death. I've made 5,000 valves while I've been here at Medtronic. If one of those valves is defective, somebody's going to die. I could never live with that. But she said, when I go home at night, this woman only made, in those days, this is 20 years ago, about $18 an hour. But I go home at night, I'm thinking about those 5,000 people who are alive and well in the world today because of heart valves I made. So there's a woman with passion. And by the way, she is a leader. She influenced everyone else on the line. They always came to her and say, Trent, is this good enough? Because this passed muster, and she did her own quality. And so she ran the training program for the workers. We didn't need a big training department. She ran the training program for the workers. So I think it's those frontline workers often that really carry the mission and passion to your company. And we've overlooked them, and we need to realize that. And so as a CEO, I got to get out with those people. I've got to be out with the first line salespeople, the first line service people, the people working in hospitals to make sure a procedure is done right and supporting a doctor. Those are the ones. And the innovators in the labs, you got to be out with them. You can't just talk to the senior vice president of R&D. You got to be out talking with the troops.
That is a powerful story, Bill. That is so cool. I think for anybody watching this, whether you are a leader in title, you're not a leader in title, if you are a leader in title, I think this can change maybe a paradigm shift of how you view the people that you work with, specifically the frontline workers, people that are working directly with your customers or directly with those that are going to get the end product, really re-engaging with them to understand their why, because I feel like their why is really the thing that really came out of that whole message you just said, Bill, is the why is so critical. Can we identify a why for our work? And if we are struggling to clarify that, it's going to be difficult for us to have that emotional stick to the work that we're doing. But if we can know what we're doing and why we're doing it, that sort of clarity can really make our work so powerful.
Yeah, just to pick up on that story, if I'd gone to her and I said, Trent, we got a real problem out here. We aren't hitting our numbers this quarter, and we need to really increase production to get more numbers up, because we've got a quarterly earnings. We've committed 91 cents to the street. I need your help to put out some more valves so we can get the numbers up. She would have looked at me like, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about that. That's not my job. My job is to make heart valves that save someone's life. So, I think sometimes leaders get away from that and they get too caught up with that, and they lose sight of what is their why. Simon Sinek talks about this. What is the person's why? But the key is, can you get alignment between the company's why and their why? And when you have that, you've got a great organization. And that's the leader's job. That's how to find that alignment and find where there's misalignment. And that's why sometimes leaders are subjected, as I was, to criticism or various things. You have to understand the why.
So what if I work in a company where maybe the why isn't so clear? Like making heart valves, I think it's pretty obvious. You're saving people's lives. What if I work in insurance? What if I work in a manufacturing company? What if I work in a distillery? What if I work in just a different type of maybe company where the end product isn't necessarily saving people's lives, but it actually absolutely brings value to their lives? How can I still find that why within that?
Well, you're bringing value to their lives. That's terrific. Say you're selling insurance. Maybe you're bringing security to them. I used to always say to my banker, look, I want you to help me make money for me, not off of me. And if you make money for me, I'm happy to pay you a commission. But if you're just there to make money off of me, I don't want anything to do with you. And I think the whole financial community, I served on the board of Goldman Sachs for 16 and a half years. I think the financial community in large, particularly the hedge funds and some of these people were just trying to make money off of money. And there was no why there. And they lost sight of the role of the financial community. They're like the gasoline in your tank. Your car's not going to go very far if you don't have any gas in the tank. They provide the fuel that enables you to go, to start a new company, to build up your business, to add a new plant, to make an acquisition. That's what bankers do. I mean, they're tremendous. And to help individuals get a life savings so you can send your child to college, but not to make money for themselves. But then you'll pay them a fair amount if they do that. So I think in any industry this applies. And you name the industry, I can tell you it really applies, because you're bringing joy to people's lives. And I think that's the key thing. Maybe it's with a friend of mine who was CEO of Best Buy, Hubert Joly, fantastic. He figured out how to figure out what are the customer's real needs and how to do it. Well, guess what? That business is booming now, because everyone now needs a home entertainment system, because they have anything to do in the evenings. They're not going out to movies. They don't want to go to a movie theater. And on the other hand, since COVID-19, they also have to have a home computer so they can work from home, and they have to be fully wired and fully electronic. They need a printer and they need everything else. And so, where are you going to get that? Well, that's they're really helping people in this new era to adapt to a change in the era.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, Bill, what are some tactics that I can start doing, or anybody that's watching this can start doing today, to start maybe getting myself into a routine, or just get into a habit of practicing authentic leadership and applying what I'm seeing today? I think you've shared some really incredible stories. I think we can start seeing some ways that we can apply it, but I find that more often than not, things stick when I can find a habit that I can do every day, even if it's just a little bit of something. Do you have any suggestions of how anybody watching this can find that habit?
I do. Number one, I think you have to have a mindfulness practice. My wife dragged me to a meditation class back in 1975, and I've been a meditator for all these years. I guess that's 45 years. Every day. I used to do it twice a day. Now I only do it once. But having something, it doesn't be meditation. It can be a walking around a lake. It can be sitting in a beautiful garden. It's a place where you reflect and say, how did I show up today? How did I engage with people? Was I fulfilling what my purpose as a leader and as a human being is? And thinking about those things every day, just 20 minutes. It's a long day. People, I don't have time. No, you need to carve out time. The second thing, I think having a group of peers around you. I just met this morning from 7:15 to 8:30. Now, you're not going to believe this, but this group has also been meeting since 1975. 4 of the 7 guys are the same. The other joined about 25 years ago. We meet every Wednesday morning, and we talk about really important issues of life. And one of the guys lives right where not far from where George Floyd was murdered and all the protests. And we went down as a group and walked the area to try to get a sense of what's going on. And you see stores burned out and the life that people have. And so it's great to have a group, but this group also is there for me in tough times. And they'll give me feedback. When I was going to leave Honeywell, they said, why did you turn Medtronic down 3 times? I said, well, I always thought I was going to be CEO of a big company. Medtronic's got a mid-size. And that was an ego thing they confronted me with. And I had to realize, no, it was the purpose of Medtronic I was passionate about. Honeywell had the only purpose of making money. So I wasn't passionate about that. So yeah, I might have been CEO of Honeywell, but I didn't want to run a company. It was just purpose of making money. So, I think, having people around you like that. And then third, having a mentor or a coach you can go to that will give you, when you get really frustrated. My mentor, since I joined Harvard Business School faculty, was a fellow professor named Nitin Noria, who's now our dean, but he was just a peer. And I would go to him and I say, Nitin, how are we going to get, I'm so frustrated. I can't get anything done. And here we used to moving so fast and things take longer here. And, he was so helpful to me, and so having a mentor he has the wisdom. Even though he's 15 years younger than I, he has a tremendous amount of wisdom. And so I can learn from that wisdom, particularly going into a new field, to have that kind of mentor. So if you don't have a mentor or a coach, someone to help you along the way, as I mentioned, a couple of mine, and when I had other mentors, some of them died, unfortunately, like Warren Bennis, but some of my earlier mentors. But now, I think I need that right now.
Yeah, that's awesome, Bill. That makes a lot of sense. I love that story about just the need to have mentors and just the need to have almost like your own internal board.
Yeah.
And just being able to confront the ego. I feel like it's so, it helps almost just realigning. Your message is very realigning of just where am I at and where am I going? I think so often I'll talk to professionals that say things like, oh, is this a lateral move for me? Or is this a horizontal move for me? Or am I moving up? Or am I moving down? And at the end of the day, I think what you're saying is, why are you making this move? Does this move ring true to your heart? Is this something going to make you passionate about it? Because ultimately, if you hate the work that you're doing, if it's only about the money, if it's only about your status, if it's only about the title, that will fade eventually. But if you're doing something that's meaningful to you, it will sustain you. And I think that's a message you're coming out with.
Well, that really, if I can chime in there, it's really important. I was president of Honeywell Europe less than 3 years. I loved it, and it was so much fun. It was one of the best jobs I ever had. I loved living in Europe and interacting with an incredible group of team we had built over there. And I got a 2-step promotion. And instead of being deeply engaged in the business of the customers, I now have 9 divisions and 3 groups. And I try to, to me, it was a big bureaucracy, which I never liked bureaucracy. And yeah, I was one of the top 5 people in the company, but maybe they're going for a CEO, but I can tell you, there was no heart to it. And I wasn't as effective then. I wasn't as good at interacting with people. So I think thinking about that, yeah, I think it gets to the ladder theory of success. And we got to stop thinking your life and your career is a ladder theory. Sheryl Sandberg once wrote that it's more like a jungle gym. You watch kids on jungle gym, they go over here and they go up here, they come down here. And so think of your life, every job you take should be a learning experience where you're growing and you're really helping so you can become more effective overall as a human being and as a leader. And so that's much more important than the ladder theory. David Brooks talks about resume values versus eulogy values and how people, and I was doing this, I confess, all the way back to college, trying to build a resume, but that's not what people want. When you go to a funeral, I've unfortunately gone to a sad funeral with some of my former bosses. No one's talking about this person being a great leader and running a great corporation. They're talking about who he was as a human being. And that's what comes through. So Brooks says, what are those eulogy values that you have and why you don't have to wait till you're 40 or 50 to pursue them. You can do it right now and get not caught up in this ladder of success.
Love that. Eulogy values versus resume values. That's such a fascinating concept and it makes a ton of sense to me. So Bill, this has been a great lunch and learn. I feel like you've shared a ton of insight with our audience. I feel like I've gotten so much from you. My last question is, how can our audience learn more about you? How can they connect with you? I know you obviously, you've come out with your book, True North. Could you share with us a little bit more about that and how our audience can learn more about you and connect with your work?
Well, I would love to connect with the people on this luncheon. My email is bgeorge@hbs.edu. But beyond that, I hope you will read Discover Your True North. I think you'll find there's a lot of stories. Oh, it's just a collection of stories. Yeah, these stories from great leaders like Ken Frazier at Merck, fantastic, Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo. These are stories about great leaders. So I think, I hope you'll read it because it really gets to the core of who you are as a leader and how you get there. And it's all about how you develop as a leader. There's no such thing as leaders that are made any more than there's great athletes that can win Wimbledon without practicing every day. You have to practice your leadership. So I would hope they do that, and hope you'll connect on LinkedIn or some other site. LinkedIn is probably my best learning site, but I'm on Facebook, and because I try to put out 4 or 5 things a day just to reflect on leadership and how I feel about that and what I'm learning, and to get into a dialogue with people and encourage people to push back if they don't agree. So I think that becomes several ways, and maybe we'll get to meet in person someday. I hope so. If we ever get out of this COVID mentality, we can actually get back to traveling around and being together.
Bill, that's awesome, and I love that. Thank you for being here today. This was an incredible Lunch and Learn. Audience, thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to see you at our next Lunch and Learn. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.